Hello there guys. Today we will take an objective look at the ideas PragerU has regarding the ideal high school. All commentary is purely my opinion. If you wish to dispute it, feel free to in the comments down below. Now without further ado, let us begin.
If every high school principal gave the following speech, America would be a much better place. What? To the students and faculty of our high school, I am your new principal and honored to be so. There is no greater calling than to teach young people. I would like to apprise you of some important changes coming to our school. First, this school will no longer honor race or ethnicity.
Oh, off to a good start already.
If you are black, brown, red, yellow, or white, I could not care less if your origins are African, European, Latin American, or Asian, or if your ancestors arrived here on the Mayflower or on slave ships. The only identity this school will recognize is your individual identity, your character, your scholarship, your humanity.
To a certain extent I understand the idea here. It is to honor the famous ideas of Martin Luther King and his famous adherence to the content of one's character and not their race. However, this statement in my view is very vague in regards to honoring race or ethnicity. Rather than honor it, why not recognize it, merely acknowledge the existence? I say this because in my opinion the way to solve racism is not to fail to honor race and ethnicity, but to acknowledge its existence and understand that it is not a defining characteristic of individuals and should be taught as such. In other words, don't ignore the existence of something, but rather acknowledge it to be informative.
And the only national identity this school will recognize is American.
Oh dear.
This is an American public school, and American public schools were created to make better Americans.
Okay, it is at this point I begin to really find this video pretentious. A school is made for the purpose of educating and informing in order to learn. How is refusing to acknowledge other national identities helpful in this regard? The idiocy behind those few words is truly terrifying. That statement, perhaps to Mr. Prager, is a positive one. But for him to assert that the purpose for a national public school is to make better people for that nation is incredibly careless, even with context. The purpose of a school is to educate, to teach individuals new ideas, and expose them to what this world has to offer. To simplify it to merely making better Americans makes public schools sound like a factory creating ideologic subservience to a country.
If you wish to affirm here an ethnic or racial identity, or a national identity other than American, you will have to attend another school.
The definition of affirm is state as a fact, assert strongly and publicly. Regardless of what Dennis Prager thinks, every individual is entitled to identify themselves however they wish. Now I'm sure he did not mean the following. However, at the very least then allow this to be a criticism of the careless vocabulary used. That being that Dennis is essentially saying, if you seek to identify yourself as anything other than American, say if you are a Hispanic immigrant from Mexico, then your identity, in his mind, must submit to being only American, and anything more or less means you must attend another school. Now I don't really think Dennis Prager is a bad guy. He is doing what he believes is good and that is okay. However, even with context, many of these statements are very unfair, and in my opinion even begin violating the rights of students guaranteed by the First Amendment.
This includes after-school clubs. I will not authorize clubs that divide students based on identities such as race, ethnicity, sexual orientation, or whatever else may become in vogue in our society.
Okay, again, I understand why he believes this is right, but he is failing to acknowledge that clubs like that have any purpose. For example, in my time in uni, there was a women's club regarding science, as science is a field that women do not go into as often as men. The entire purpose of the club was to bring awareness to this and see if more women would be interested in STEM education. Not only this, but men were also allowed into the club. So there was no discrimination here, merely a desire to bring awareness to a statistical difference of interests between genders, and try to acknowledge if there was any reason for it besides personal interests. So I would genuinely like to know, what is the downside of that? There were also clubs in my time in uni that did have different racial identities, but again they didn't discriminate on who could join. In fact, you could learn about the lives, ideas, and cultures of different groups and upbringings. So again I ask, what is the downside with a club like that?
Those clubs cultivate narcissism.
You don't say!
While the purpose of education is to get you to think beyond yourself.
Okay, but this statement contradicts the very statement you made about forcing all of your students to adhere to one national identity. The two statements when put together are an all too clear recognition of the cognitive dissonance behind this video.
The school's clubs will be based on interests and passions. Clubs that transport you to the wonders and glories of art, music, astronomy, languages you do not already speak, and more.
Okay, but again all of those passions can historically be traced back to various national identities and histories. How can you acknowledge a passion without the origin or understanding of the history of said passion? It's like learning Mozart's music without ever acknowledging that his music had him as the source.
If the only extracurricular activities you can imagine being interested in are those based on ethnicity, race, or sexual identity, that means that little outside of yourself really interests you.
That has to be the biggest straw man argument I have ever heard. These clubs often have to do with awareness and education. What if a person has ancestors in Russia, Africa, Haiti, Ireland, or France? Is that person then a narcissist for wanting to learn more about where he came from and their other national identity?
Second,
Oh god. That was only the first rule. Well, here we go.
I do not care whether English is your native language. My only interest in terms of language is that you leave this school speaking and writing English as fluently as possible. The English language has united America's citizens for over 200 years, and it will unite us at this school.
Realistically speaking, there isn't too much wrong with this statement, other than saying that the language alone is unifying. A bit over the top, but not a big deal.
We will learn other languages here. It's deplorable that most Americans only speak English.
An excellent statement, and I myself am also guilty of only knowing one language, so consider this self-reflection on my part.
But if you want classes taught in your native language rather than in English, this is not the right school for you.
All around a fair statement. America is a predominantly English-speaking country. However, assistance to students who struggle to speak English should be acknowledged.
Third, because I regard learning as a sacred endeavor, everything in this school will reflect learning's elevated status. This means, among other things, that you and your teachers will dress accordingly. There will be a dress code at this school. And you will address all teachers by their title, not by their first name. They are your teachers, not your pals.
Honestly, this just seems overly strict. For example, I had one professor who was such a kind soul that he not only brought out the passion for politics and history in me, but he also frequently helped students pay for expensive exam tests that would greatly help them go on to better universities. I won't say his name, but if he should ever find this video, know I'm forever grateful, as are all others who were privileged to learn from you.
Fourth, no obscene language will be tolerated anywhere on this school's property. By obscene language, I mean the words banned on radio and television, plus epithets such as the B word.
In New Jersey, that's considered a compliment.
Or the N word, even when used by one black student to another.
This is normal for all schools, so it isn't a big deal.
Fifth, we will end all self-esteem programs. In this school, self-esteem will be attained in only one way, the only way self-esteem can be attained, by earning it.
This is okay in most cases. However, it fails to acknowledge that self-esteem is a common issue for people diagnosed with depression, obsessive-compulsive disorder, anxiety, and various other mental illnesses. The failure to acknowledge that, in my view, is merely careless and altogether foolish on Dennis Prager's part.
One immediate consequence is that graduating classes will have one valedictorian, not 8.
But having a valedictorian award is helpful to many going on to better schools. This merely just seems like Dennis being bitter to the fact that the competition doesn't have only one victor. In my opinion it helps, because being a valid Victorian is difficult, whether there are 1 or 8. I would say this increases the talent pool and does not decrease it.
Sixth and last, I am reorienting the school toward academics and away from politics and propaganda.
Dennis doesn't seem to know that politics and propaganda are vastly different. Politics is the activities associated with the governance of a country or other area, especially the debate or conflict among individuals or parties having or hoping to achieve power, whereas propaganda is information, especially of a biased or misleading nature, used to promote or publicize a particular political cause or point of view. Put simply, one is debate regarding how to govern and who is best suited for such responsibility and power. The other is being an idiot and lying for your own selfish cause.
No more time will be devoted to racism, sexism, Islamophobia, homophobia, global warming, tobacco, or gender identity.
Holy shit, I think I lost some brain cells there. He is saying that any of the aforementioned issues are either political or propaganda. Tobacco is something causing the deaths of over 400,000 Americans every year alone. Global warming, while still a topic of debate, and yes, I'm dismissing the 97% figure, which is very biased regarding scientists saying climate change is man-made. However, there are many scholarly sources that discuss and debate the issue of global warming. And to find this, you literally only need to go on Google Scholar to find them, or access a university database. Racism, sexism, and homophobia are all issues that exist today, regardless of how big or small. To pretend they have suddenly stopped existing and are just political or, God forbid, in your mind, propaganda, Dennis, is perhaps the most perfect form of ignorance I have ever seen. And as for gender identity, you have no right to prevent people from talking about that issue. It has been a part of human history for eons in regard to male and female, and the expansion of gender identity beyond that, whether you like it or not, is not up to you to regulate. That violates the First Amendment in every way.
No more classes will be devoted to condom wearing and teaching you to regard sexual relations as no more than a health issue.
But it is a health issue. This man clearly has never heard of Tinder or one-night stands. Regardless of your opinion on them, STDs are an issue tied into this, and teaching students how to avoid something that could otherwise ruin their life and health for years to come is worth as much devotion as any other subject in schools.
And there will be no more attempts to convince you that you are a victim because you are not white or male or heterosexual or Christian. This school will have failed if any of you graduate without considering him or herself inordinately lucky.
This is just careless. Yes, most are lucky to live in America, and not some third world hellhole where they are paid 3 pennies an hour, while struggling not to die 24/7. But to pretend that it is impossible for someone to be a victim in any case regarding race or any identity is just ridiculous.
Lucky to be alive and lucky to be an American.
Goddamn right.
Now please stand and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag of our country. As many of you do not know the words, your teachers will hand them out to you.
Ironically enough, you legally don't have to say the pledge as it violates your First Amendment rights. Note that if this statement offends you, I couldn't give any less of a damn. Politics and history are my passion, and I carry a pocket constitution around with me wherever I go, consistently reading it in my free time. Now I myself happily say the pledge and stand for it. However, if someone else does not, that is their human right, and I recognize that. I hope Dennis does as well.
I'm Dennis Prager.
And I'm Crimson Inferno.